Listen, the other day, I'm sitting there on the couch, probably like 10:30 at night, and I'm just scrolling on my phone. Scrolling, and I'm not paying attention to anything that I'm scrolling. You know what I'm talking about? Like, where you're just kind of like, you're going through the motions because they're motions. Like, you're not registering anything. And then at one point, I get this feeling of like sudden sadness. I was like suddenly sad. And then like I had these other feelings. I was like, I'm a failure. I'm not good enough. I'm worthless. And I sat there and I was like, what made me feel this way? What made me feel like I want to throw my phone across the room? What's making me do that? So I'm like, I'm going to investigate. So I start scrolling back up at all the things I had mindlessly looked at. And listen, we know this. We know that social media is a highlight reel. We get it, right? But we don't know it. So I'm going through and I'm looking at people's food and vacations and all the good things they're doing. But that's not the thing that's bothering me. And then I get to it. And I just feel this pang of like sadness and like I'm not good enough and like second guessing myself. And it was another pastor. This pastor had like a minute clip of their video up. And they had subtitles under it. And I like listened to this minute clip and it was good. It wasn't great. It was good. And then I looked down and there were like, just a bunch of likes and a bunch of comments. And that was the thing that made me sad. That was the thing that made me feel like a failure. And so I sat there and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be like this pastor because I'm not hustling enough to get like my 1-minute sermon clips plus like a subtitle up ready to rock and roll for everybody. Like I don't have it in me to do it. And then if I did, do I really have anything to say to the point where maybe I would get this many likes or this many comments? And so then two distinct thoughts went through my head. Distinct thought number one. Jonathan, you can do better. Just hustle a little bit more, and you too can be like this pastor who has all these likes on their 1-minute clip. And then the second thought that went through my head is, just quit because you're never going to be good enough. Oh boy, it put me in a spot, but it's not the first time I've been in that spot, y'all. It's not the first time you've been in that spot either, because the truth is we all look somewhere else to determine how we're doing. Every single one of us looks somewhere else to determine how we're doing. So let me ask you, where do you look to determine how you are doing? My friend is a designer, and my friend was just looking at their phone so sadly, just like I was. And I was like, what's wrong? And she was like, I'm never going to create a font as good as this one. And then she shows me, and I was like, oh. Like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. But my designer people out there, y'all know what you're looking at. And you feel that too, right? Where do you go to determine how well you're doing? Space is huge here, right? And so maybe we're not looking at like yards and like houses like the suburbs. But y'all, we look at other people's spaces to determine how we're doing. Look at them. They don't need roommates, which means they're doing pretty well. I wish I was doing as well as them. Or they have outdoor space. Oh, wow, that's really nice. Ooh, they live a block from the subway. Like, those are the types of things that we think. We're like, they must be doing something right? Because we're not doing that well. Where do you look to determine how well you are doing? It's Valentine's Day, and I know that so many of us use relationships as a gauge to determine how well they're doing. I'm this old and I thought I'd be in a relationship now. This is ridiculous. Or I thought I'd be partnered up at this point. Or I can't believe I'm still having to date at this point. Dating sucks. I wish I could be like people who didn't have to date. And we sit there and we compare ourselves to people who have significant others. Or for that matter, people who don't have significant others, right? And on this day especially, we do that. And where do we look to determine how well we're doing when it comes to our relationships? And I just want to say real quick, it's hard. Dating is hard. This is not easy. So if you're feeling that way today, be compassionate on yourself. It's okay. Truly, it's okay. But where else do we go? I have kids, so this is an issue that maybe some of y'all don't have. In fact, right now, those of you who are watching and you do have kids, give yourselves a pat on the back. You're doing it. Because I compare myself to people who have kids all the time, and my kids are always on their phone, and they're always awake, and they never go to bed, and they never leave the house, and they're always playing games. like Roblox and Adopt Me. I don't even know what that means, but they're doing that. And I compare myself to the other parents who their kids aren't on their phones all day and they do get time away, and I'm not good enough, and this is where I'm looking to determine how well I'm doing. This is the bottom line. We are a people who look towards others to determine how well we're doing. Now, before you get upset with yourself, don't get upset with yourself. We get this naturally. We get this honestly. And as you know, I love to talk about our brains, and so I'm going to talk about our brains again. You see, our brains are set up to create comparison. Because at one point in our history, at one point in our evolutionary process, it was a good thing to compare to other people. Comparison was good. Think about it. You were there and somebody was like, oh my gosh, look at them. They're able to grow enough food and they won't starve. So maybe we should all start growing our own food too, so we won't starve, right? Comparison keeps us alive. Oh, look at them. They didn't get killed by that animal. In fact, they killed the animal. Maybe we should be like them. Again, survival, right? Oh, look, they took those herbs and now they're not sick anymore. Maybe we should take those herbs. There was a point in which comparison allowed our genes to pass on from generation to generation to generation. We can all thank those brains for the fact that we're here. Those brains that compared themselves to others are the reason that we're alive today. But the truth of the matter is this: what was once helpful for us, comparison, is no longer helpful for us. In fact, it hasn't been helpful for us for some time. And so instead, we live in the land of Now, what is the land of Now, I got to give credit to a corny yet effective pastor named Andy Stanley, who says the land of is when we look at someone else and say, oh my gosh, they're healthier, they're prettier, they're wealthier, they're superior. And we look at those folks in the land of and what we do is we don't say, I can't get there. What we end up saying is, I should be there. I should be healthier, wealthier, prettier, superior. I should be in that situation, and I'm not. Therefore, something's wrong with me. No, something's not wrong with you. Your brains are doing a number on you. In fact, I want to read you this. This is from the writer Justin Sebastian, and he breaks it down for us. And he says this. He says, in the early 1980s, a particular scientist found out that the left brain takes information and makes up a story. Here's how it works. A thing happens, we react, we feel something about it, and then we go on to explaining it. Sensory information feeds into an explanatory module, and our brains become the storyteller. Okay? We've all experienced this. Remember the time you sent a text to a crush and they did not respond for a while? The left brain, the storyteller, spins out hundreds of stories questioning our worthiness and lovability. Y'all have been there before? I know I have. You see it at work too. A dismissive glance from a coworker can turn into I knew she didn't like me. The narrative part of the brain takes everything we perceive and turns it into a story that makes sense. And our brains do not care about factual accuracy or evidence. The story is often based on incomplete information and filled with cognitive biases. Okay? So let me give you an example of how comparison and our brain chemistry affect us. Let's take, for example, say, wealth. Now, I know that nobody watching today has any problems comparing their wealth to the wealth of another. We'll give it an example anyway, won't we? So when we think about wealth, what our brains have done, especially here in America, in a capitalist society, is our brains have created a story. And the story says that if you are wealthy, you are morally superior. You are blessed. You must have done something right. You must be a hard worker. You must be innovative. You must not be lazy, right? These are the stories that we've told ourselves. It has nothing to do with greed, right? Or has nothing to do with unethical ways of living. No, it has everything to do with hard work and value and making sure that you're working the best you can. And on the flip side, we've created a narrative that has said if you are poor, it must be because you are amoral. It must be because you have some sort of moral deficiency. And I keep saying this in every one of these messages. This is the reason that we'll never get upset at the rich. It's why those of us who are working class will always look at those below us and get mad at those below us. Because those below us, they have the moral deficiency. And so if they have the moral deficiency, they're the ones hurting us. They're the ones taking our jobs. They're the ones coming into our country, so on and so forth. We never look up at the wealthy and say they're the ones that are hurting us through loopholes and not paying taxes and all the rest, because we believe, we've told ourselves a story that they are morally upright. Do you see how this false dichotomy works? Do you see how our brains are constantly tricking us? And I want to read this next part, because what happens is when we tell ourselves these stories, and our the leading way in which we tell them, the leading feelings that we feel when telling these stories are always fear and anxiety. Now back to Justin Sebastian. He says, fear was one of the most advantageous survival traits for our ancestors in the savannah. When you hear the roar of a lion, fear takes over your mind and helps you run for safety, so the genes that prioritized fear and anxiety survived, while the genes that prioritized positive emotions extinguished itself from the gene pool. What we are left with is a fearful, anxious mind that is always on the lookout for the next incoming danger. And in the case of comparison, danger is not being wealthy enough, pretty enough, good enough, thus jeopardizing one's survival. This is why we're living in the land of Ur, y'all, because our brains are tricking us, leading with fear and anxiety, telling us false narratives that reaffirm the idea we're not good enough and that other people are always going to be way better. Okay, breathe. Give yourself a pat on the back. We're all going to be okay. In fact, Jesus tells us we're going to be okay. And I'm going to talk about Jesus right now. In fact, we're going to talk about the Sermon on the Mount, because this Sermon on the Mount, this B series, has in some ways become a little bit of a self-help series for us. That's what Jesus is trying to do for the people who are listening. They're incredibly poor, the people who are listening. I say this all the time. They had to give away about 80% of their earnings to the Roman Empire. They literally do not know where they're going to get their next meal. And what they see is the religious who have sided with the Roman Empire. Those religious folks are doing rather well. In fact, they have a lot of money. And so what do people start to think? Do they start to blame the Roman Empire? Do they start to blame those rich religious teachers? No, they don't blame them. Of course not, because we've created these narratives, right? They blame themselves. And in blaming themselves, they're also living in the land of Ur. I'm not religious enough. I'm not praying enough. I'm not fasting enough. I'm not giving enough, right? They start to say those things. If I could just be a better giver, if I could be a better faster, if I could be, a better prayer, I'd be more superior. That's where they're at. And when Jesus is preaching this sermon, Jesus knows this. And so what Jesus does is Jesus speaks directly to those who have created this comparison narrative. And he says, to all of you who've created this comparison narrative where you think you're not as good as, I'm going to tell you something. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. And when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. And so what Jesus is doing is he's saying, hey, we see you making those comparisons. And we see this false narrative that you've created that says that you are not as good as them, that God is not blessing you in the same way because you do not have what they have. And I'm here to tell you that it's a lie. In fact, when Jesus says, hey, they're going to get their reward in full, it's just a nice way of saying they're going to get what's coming to them, right? And what Jesus does is he starts off with the word righteousness. That's what Jesus does. Jesus is working from a place where he is saying to the poor and oppressed audience that they do not have to compare themselves to others because they are already righteous. They are already loved. They are already children of God. That's a nice thing. That's a good thing, especially for some of us listening today. Because some of us listening today have been told that we're not loved. We've been told that we're not children of God. We've been told that we're not okay, that we do have a moral deficiency, and that we should compare ourselves to others who are maybe more religious or who maybe have learned and turned away from X sin or whatever the case may be. And Jesus says that's all a lie. The place that you start from is knowing that you are a child of God. And I love the way that Paul says it. I'm going to read it. I'm jumping a little bit. Paul says, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to childship. So what's happening here is Paul is saying what Jesus is saying, which is, hey, you don't have to make this whole play around the law. You don't have to fast out loud, pray out loud, give out loud. Know that you are already adopted as a child of God. Now, I love this term adopted, because adopted does not mean what we think it means. Adoption in the first century looked way different. In fact, in the first century, you rarely adopted children, sadly, because children died often. I know, it's kind of sad. You adopted adults, though. Isn't that odd? You adopted adults, and it was a common practice. Do you know why you adopted adults? When you were adopting adults for a good thing, you were doing it because they had a unique gift or a unique way about them or something that was attractive about them that made them adoptable. Okay, that's what they had. In fact, one of the best stories is Augustus Caesar, who was the Caesar around the time of Jesus. He wanted an heir to be the next Caesar and looked at his own children and was like, these children are awful. They're stereotypical trust fund kids. All they care about are their phones. And said, I'm going to adopt someone else. So Caesar adopted Tiberius. Now, Tiberius became the next Caesar, Caesar Tiberius. Do you know how old Tiberius was when he was adopted by Caesar Augustus? Tiberius was 40 years old. 40! Right? And the reason Tiberius was adopted is because Tiberius had this unique gift to actually bring people together. There's a whole story behind it. I can give you the stuff to look it up. It's kind of fascinating. And what Jesus is saying, Jesus is living in this time. And Jesus is saying, start from a place that you are already adopted. And so for people who are poor, what they're hearing is, I'm starting from a place where I already know I'm loved because I have unique gifts, because I have unique abilities. Because of my personality, because I exist, I'm already adopted. I'm already good. Do you see how they're speaking to sort of the way of the first century or the way of the day? And so in Jesus, starting with righteousness, what Jesus is doing is saying, start from a place where you know that you don't live in the land of Ur. In fact, what you have is already good enough. And then it gets to the second point, which is not a point that we love. And I'm going to tell you that we don't love this point. Because what Jesus says, it says, when you're looking over there, ultimately what you're saying is that what God has given me isn't good enough. The way I've been blessed isn't good enough. And ultimately what we're doing in that situation is comparing God to just maybe a genie, something a little bit bigger than we are, and saying, I don't get it. I don't get why I haven't received this or why I haven't received that. And God's sitting there going, you're already adopted, and I've adopted you because you do have those gifts and those unique abilities because you are distinctly you. So what do you do with the fact that you're distinctly you? Which brings us to our next point. And here's the next thing that Jesus says. Jesus says, if you want to see the change in your outside world, the first step is to connect with God inwardly. When you're doing things for show, you're only going to bring about comparison. So Jesus says to these people, he says, don't do things for show. Pray in secret, fast in secret, give in secret. Do these things in secret. In other words, look within, do some meditation, pray, think about the selfless ways that you give. Do it all quietly. And so Jesus is speaking to meditation. Now here's the beauty of meditation. Remember 5 minutes ago? 5 minutes ago when I said our brains, they tell false stories? Well, meditation will end the false storytelling. It's proven to be done. It's proven that meditation will end false storytelling. In fact, in 2016, we had a guy come to our church. He goes by the name of Science Mike. He's a podcaster. He's a writer. He does a lot of other things. And he said something to me in 2016 that I think about every day. Every day I think about it. He said meditation, when practiced, will bring thankfulness, prayer, love, and make us more gracious, joyful, and confident. And this is the last one. When we meditate, when we move inwardly, what it does is it makes us more accepting of our own unique gifts and abilities. When Jesus is saying to move inward, It's actually countering the false narratives our brain create when we talk about comparison. When we move inward, what we're actually doing is we're practicing how to become accepting of us, of self. We're learning about how to lean into the gifts that we've been given, us and self. I've talked to two people this week who are both going through incredibly difficult circumstances. And I asked both of them, I said, how are you doing and how are you getting through all this? And they both said the same thing to me. They said, you know what? I'm thinking about how thankful I am every morning when I wake up. Every morning when I wake up, I say, well, I'm thankful I have my children. I'm thankful that I have my body. I'm thankful that I have my health. And the other person said they journal it all. I'm writing down all the ways in which I'm looking forward to the day, or I'm thankful for something that's happened, or the fact that I'm even awake. And you see, I had this coach, and this coach said, practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. And if we're permanently looking outside at others, if we're permanently doing that, if we're practicing that, then that's going to become permanent. We're never going to be good enough. We're going to be Elon Musk wishing we were Jeff Bezos, or whoever's the richest person in the world right now. I don't even know who it is, right? That's what we're always going to do. But if we can get quiet, if we can look inwardly, if we can take time each day to meditate, we are going to begin to accept that we have been uniquely made by God. And so the question does not become, where do you look to determine how you're doing? The question then becomes, what are you planning to do with what God has entrusted you? What are you planning to do with what God has entrusted you as God's unique and adopted and favored child? What are you planning to do with what God has entrusted you? And that's what we begin to practice. We begin to practice telling our brains, we've been entrusted. What are we gonna do with it? What are we gonna do with it? And so the first thing I have to tell you is the simplest of things. Your quiet time matters. You know how we make fun of quiet time sometimes because quiet time at one point in our spiritual lives was related to going to hell if we didn't do it? Just me? Anyway, when we're quiet and we practice, it's going to make permanent our security in God. It's going to make permanent the fact our unique abilities. And so I would encourage us, just 5-10 minutes a day. Let's quiet ourselves. Let's be thankful. If you want to journal, let's journal. Because that practice is going to change that brain chemistry. And next thing you know, you are going to become more gracious, more joyful, more filled with love, and more content in what you've been given. Start there, okay? And if you need help with that, our staff, this is what we're here for. We love helping with this kind of stuff, right? So lean into that practice and then lean into your uniqueness. And you know, here's the thing, our uniqueness, it comes with a bunch of caveats. And so it's funny, I was out with friends recently, and I'm out with them, and they said, hey, Jonathan, how much have you saved? And I got real quiet, and I was like, probably not enough. I haven't. And they said, well, we've saved this much, and we've done this. And I got home, and I said to my wife, I was like, Juby, guess what? We need to save more. And she said, well, how are we going to do that? And I said, I'm going to find work doing some consulting stuff on the side, and we can just save all that. And so I start looking for all this consulting stuff I can do. I can make extra money here. I can make extra money there. And I start doing that. And here's the thing. Everything I'm looking at has nothing to do with my unique gifts and abilities. Nothing. Like it's almost like I was throwing them away just because I realized that there are other people who are saving more money than me. And all of a sudden I stopped and I was like, what am I doing? I would hate every one of these things. Why do I care about them? And what I recognize is my comparison is conformity. My comparison is conformity. I just want to be like others. Instead of saying, you know, what am I going to do with what God has entrusted me? My comparison is conformity. What am I going to do with the unique abilities which God has entrusted me with? Now, there are some of you out there, and you're sitting there and you're going, I have a unique gift. I have this skill, and it hasn't translated into financial success yet. And I've had this skill or this gift or this thing, and I'm still living with 5 roommates, or I've done this. And to that I say, we are born with this unique gift. And yeah, maybe we need to do something else to live, but let's not give up on our uniqueness. Let's not give up on what we have been given, because what we have been given doesn't need to be compared. It is the gift from God who says, you are my adopted child because you have this gift. What are you going to do with this unique gift to which God has entrusted you. And then we keep going. What are we going to say yes to that the rest of the world is not saying yes to? What I love about our church is that we have this Justice League that continues to say yes to justice when other churches don't want to touch justice with a 10-foot pole, right? And our church continues to say yes because we have people passionate. And they're like, I don't care if this doesn't fit into the normal, quote unquote, normal Christianity. I'm going to lean into justice, into Justice League, and to working with Faith in New York. Shout out to our justice team, by the way, because this is what God has entrusted me with. What are we going to do with what God has entrusted us, you? You know, the rest of the world is going, hustle, work really hard, you got to get ahead. And you know what we might have to do? We might have to take a nap. Say yes to that. That might be what God has entrusted you with. The rest of the world is going, be hard on yourself, because it's when you're hard on yourself that you improve. And what if we said, no, today I'm compassionate, because in my compassion to myself, in the rest I'm giving myself, I'm entrusting what God has given me. I'm using it wisely, and to use it wisely today means I take a break from it. What are we going to do with what God has entrusted you? You have that unique gift. You have that unique ability. You have that thing. You do not have to live in the land of Ur, because the truth of the matter is God sees you and God goes, you are filled with health. You are filled with wealth. You are filled with skill. You are the superior, right? You just don't know it. Know this. Get inside of yourselves. Meditate a little. Become more joyful. Become more gracious. Do these things, because right now we're fighting a battle. And we're fighting a battle in our heads. And the battle in our head says, hey, look outside and let them determine what you're supposed to be up to. But you are an adopted child of God. An adopted child of God who has been given gift beyond gift upon gift. And so when Jesus comes and Jesus says to those poor folks, hey, don't be like the others. As the adopted child of God, look at what you have. Look inward and decide, what are you going to do? What are we going to do? What am I going to do with what God has entrusted to me? With what God has entrusted to us? With what God is entrusting to each and every one of you. To that I say, amen. And we're going to go into a time of prayer now. In this time of prayer, while this truck is outside my door being really loud, I'm going to try to get out beyond it. I want you to, maybe you're feeling, hey, I haven't gotten a job yet, and I'm really nervous. I'm really worried. I'm not where I thought I would be. I'm in a relationship, and it's not going as well as I thought, or I'm not in a relationship, and I'm having trouble seeing fidelity and joy and love happening outside of this romantic relationship that everybody thinks I should have, right? Whatever it is, drop it in the comment section. We want to take this time to pray for it, okay? And I want to pray for you right now. So can we pray together? God, we always say to you who does exceedingly and abundantly more than we could ever ask or imagine. We say it all the time, and yet we don't believe it. Lord, help us to be reminded today that you have given us gifts, talents, and skills that are exceedingly and abundantly more than we've ever asked or imagined. Help us to look inwardly so we can see those, cultivate those, use those as your adopted children of God. We pray a prayer of thanks that this is done in advance. We pray this in your name. Amen.